Hello, welcome to this edition of the UMGoBlue.com podcast. This is Phil Callahan along with,
Clint.
and we're going to preview Michigan's next game, a road test, their Big Ten opener versus the Nebraska Cornhuskers.
We're a dominant team. That's really what we are. There's no other way to put it. We're going to dominate every way possible. Whatever we got thrown at us, we're going to give back what we need to. So,
Michigan enters the game with a record of 2-1. Nebraska comes in undefeated, 3-0. Well, Clint, what do you think about this one?
Well, is Michigan going to look like the team that we saw in week one at home, comfortable with Bryce Underwood, but still pretty conservative? Or is it going to be like week two on the road against Oklahoma in a hostile environment where they kind of take the foot off the gas, kind of keep the bubble wrap on Bryce Underwood on offense and struggle to make plays on defense on third down? Or, is it going to be somewhere kind of in between? That's where that falls is really the key question. I think Michigan is telling the truth. I think the Biff Poggi and the rest of the staff do want to kind of turn the corner here on offense and unleash Bryce and open up the playbook a little bit. Certainly threaten the whole field, because that's allow him to make mistakes. Trust your defense to kind of save you after he makes a mistake. So I think that they're being honest about that, but I don't think that it's going to look like what we saw against Central Michigan. Obviously, difference in competition, but I don't think that they're going to even be quite that aggressive. Probably on a sliding scale, probably somewhere in between what we saw against Central and against Oklahoma on the road. So I expect Michigan to play well. I still think that the key to victory is leaning on your defense. Try to create some turnovers, create some havoc, give the offense some short fields, and then we will see if the interior offensive line can really push around the Cornhuskers. I think that's offensively, I think that's where they have the best matchup outside of Bryce Underwood's individual talent level. I think as a system, the interior of Michigan's offensive line really needs to get that push that we saw against the Chippewas in Lincoln, and everything else will kind of build off of that inside run and dual play.
Well, interim coach Biff Poggi is definitely setting the standard for what I think Michigan fans would love to see.
Yes, it's an explosive offense. It's designed to be an explosive offense. It's designed to be an up-tempo offense. And it is, you don't know where the football's coming from. You can get reverses, you can get, any different kind of short throws, which are just long runs. There's a multitude of runs from gap schemes to zones, to inside and outside zones. There's a robust screen game, which you didn't really see today. So it is a very hard offense to stop. And I understand what the next question is going to be. We thought at Oklahoma we would take the air out of the ball because they're an air raid offense, and we're not taking the air out of the ball ever again. Not with this guy and taking the snaps.
But I agree with you, Clint. It's one thing for the team to be more aggressive, but it's another thing to expect a result like we saw against Central Michigan. When we look back at the first three games of Michigan's season, I think we saw how good the team could be and we saw how bad the team could be. Of course, they were as good as they could be versus Central, and they struggled on the road against Oklahoma. A lot of fans believe that if they had just opened up a little bit versus Oklahoma, what we saw versus Central, we would have seen down there. And I think that what we saw against Central was a combination of, yes, opening up the playbook a little bit, but really, Michigan was on the road. Oklahoma had a lot more talent than what Central has. And this test, heading on the road in Nebraska, is is going to be very interesting. It's going to be very telling. And it's not a, hey, this is what you're going to see for the rest of the year. But I think it's going to help. It's going to be the game that helps us judge what we saw in the first three games. What is closer reality? And I think what you said about relying on the defense is something we're going to see again.
Yeah, and there was a big kind of a tangible difference when we saw Jay-Sean Barham really mixed into the pass rush off of the edge. Again, there's kind of I've heard different perspectives. I mentioned that I thought maybe it was a 4-3 under with three linebackers on the field. I've heard that maybe it looked a little bit more like a 3-4, 5-2 with the down linemen being bigger guys, and that nobody was really playing that anchor style end inside. But regardless of the X's and O's, I think Jay-Sean Barham is really going to be the X factor and creating havoc, like I said. Rod Moore possibly comes back, makes his season debut, plays for the first time since the national championship game. I think that's a big boost in a couple ways emotionally, right? I think he's going to be really fired up, and I think that it will be contagious for the rest of the guys on that defense. And nobody has seen more reps and understands this defense better than Rod Moore. So even as he knocks the rust off physically, I think Michigan is going to be better on defense if he is able to play, because he knows what he's looking at quickly. He diagnoses what he sees quickly, and he's been the hub of the communication on the defense before. So I like Michigan's chances to play really well. I just think that they have to carry a little bit more of the load if Michigan's playing complementary football. I'd say it needs to be 60-40 defense and not 50-50. I think they need to create some opportunities either through turnovers or quick 3-and-outs, pinning Nebraska deep, and then making them flip the field and getting punt return opportunities. So somehow the defense is going to have to shorten the field to help the offense out, because again, Bryce Underwood is going to look different on the road against a Big Ten opponent, number 9 SP plus defense for Nebraska. He's going to look different in this game than he did against Central Michigan. And I think the defense is going to have to provide him some cover for that.
While Michigan fans have a lot to feel good about after that 63-3 thumping of Central Michigan, Nebraska also has a lot to feel good about. Again, they're undefeated. They began the season squeaking out a victory 20-17 versus Cincinnati, but in the next game, they threw a shutout versus Akron, winning 68-0, and then their next game, they beat Houston Christian 59-7. So their offense definitely enters in surging, and the question will be, what will happen when the immovable force meets the immovable object, right? You have an offense that's surging, and you have Michigan's defense that we've been touting has been great. And, there's a lot of reasons why I think the Michigan defense is going to need to step up. One of the things that Michigan, the players and Biff Poggi mentioned was that Nebraska is a really difficult place to play.
Well, everything stacks, doesn't it? And Nebraska's, I don't know if there's a harder place to play than Nebraska. Fans are very loud. The stadium is loud, very raucous. They'll obviously be very excited. And what Bryce has to learn, and I think Bryce learned this, just be Bryce. You're not playing against the stadium. There's 11. They got 11. We got 11.
So one of the things that we saw that hampered the team in Oklahoma is how does the offensive line get distribute the call amongst themselves, right? So last game versus Central Michigan, you had 2 new guards in play. We found out this week that Gio El Hadi is going to be out again, so we're going to see another mixed offensive line, and Nebraska crowds are known for being super loud. So again, there's going to be a lot of interesting things, and again, like you said, they mentioned that one of the reasons that we didn't see TJ Guy is that they were going with a bigger set, right? And that goes to your point of what defenses were they exactly running? And I'm wondering, is that a way of basically hiding their hand heading into this game, showing that the defense could do things differently? So definitely going to be a lot to keep an eye on. I'll tell you, Clint, we talked a lot in the previous podcasts about how this season was going to depend on how good the offensive line was. And in the post game, we learned that before Sharon Moore was suspended from on field practice coaching duties, he spent a ton of time with the offensive line. And there were a lot of questions for Evan Link in preparation for this game about what exactly did Sharon do.
There definitely was a difference, just because you have the eyes of the head coach are a little different from just your position coach or your coordinator sometimes, and that's nothing to say that you don't want to perform in front of those guys as well, because you obviously do, right? But when you have that head coach looking in on you too, right? It's an added level of, all right, let me be extra detailed, let me be extra focused, let me have extra effort here, because that guy's there, right? That guy's the head man of the program, right? That's the head coach. So you want to do the best you can for the head coach. So I think that kind of fueled us in practice, where maybe we had a few things that, because he was there, we kind of stepped up, and I think that translated to the game well.
And why do you think he spent so much time with the O-line?
I think it was really just, I think because, obviously Oklahoma didn't go the way we wanted to, and the running game kind of in that game was a little inconsistent at times, and I think that was partially on us, and there's several reasons for it, right? But part of it was us just, we need to be more physical, and I think Coach Moore has always been great with the physicality aspect of football, right? He yards on them a lot, and so I think him being there was just him trying to kind of extra emphasize that physicality part, and I think that was kind of what was lacking in Oklahoma at times. So I think that was really the reason why I can think of.
And it's going to be interesting because, so you had in the run up to the Central Michigan game, Sharon Moore gave extra special attention to the offensive line. Well, in this past week, he wasn't there. He wasn't able to. So now we're going to see how much did that fine tuning carry over into this game, and how big of an issue do we have on the offensive line? You made some great points in the watching the Central game that there were times the offensive line looked great, and you wonder, is that because we have a different lineup? Is that because of Sharon Moore's input? Heading on the road, hostile environment, tons of crowd noise, tons of pressure. I think that's going to be one of the keys to this game. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I think they have somewhat of an advantage on the interior, especially with that inside zone or duo play that they like to run. And the biggest difference that I saw from week 1 to week 3 along the offensive line was that there were offensive linemen that were getting up onto the linebacker level. So when you watch the ball get snapped on the TV feed, you see the initial collision, of course, but you really want to see the winged helmets get up to that second level, get up to the guys that start back off the line of scrimmage to the linebacker level. That is the key to their inside run game, is starting with a double team, right, with two Michigan offensive linemen on one defensive lineman, and communicating physically and or verbally with your partner there about who is going to actually come off of that double team and get up to the linebacker at the second level. They really didn't do that at all against New Mexico. It's pretty easy to see, if you go back and watch that game, the linebackers who made lots of tackles for New Mexico, very rarely did they have to shed a block. They were running pretty free. They were able to get right into the gaps and kind of unharassed make tackles. And by the time they got to the Central Michigan game, I think Sharon Moore had helped fix whatever keys or cues or communication issues were stopping Michigan from getting to that second level. of blocking. So it made a huge difference. I think we'll see it kind of spring another couple explosive runs. I don't know if Justice Haynes gets another 75 yarder to the house, but I do think that he'll get a couple that are going to be 20, 30-yard runs, or Jordan Marshall as well, certainly capable, because they're going to be able to wear down that Nebraska defensive line. So I look for a really explosive running game to be a big difference in the second half. Probably as the third quarter starts to close and we start the fourth quarter, Michigan's going to have to be leaning on that run game and wearing down the Cornhuskers.
And Jordan Marshall, I think, echoed your expectations where he talked about that what Sharon's fine-tuning brought to the offensive line.
When you're connected in that O-line room and they can, no matter who's in the game, they're connected and know where each other's going to be at, we're going to be unstoppable. And I think Coach Moore, Coach Newsome, that whole coaching staff has done a great job getting those guys connected. And I love being around them. They're all really good and funny guys to be around.
On one hand, it's going to be interesting to see how good the offensive line is. I have, again, we're a quarter of the way through the season, which is one of our major checkpoints. I want Michigan to do well, but I'm starting to have a nagging concern about when your head coach needs to spend so much time with any individual unit. I wonder what that means long-term for that unit. And in this case, Grant Newsome coaching that unit, but again, early in the season, not my swim lane, but definitely something that I think fans will be watching and something that I think Sharon Moore is going to have to continue to watch. It's not a great look that when your head coach needs to jump in and fine tune any unit. So we'll be keeping an eye on that. Now, so we talked about the offensive line and, the goal with the offensive line doing well is to let Bryce be Bryce. One of the things that Biff Poggi said in the run-up to this game is that
he got a green light to do whatever he wants because he's one of the great playmakers, I think, in the country. You can coach competitors to slide, and it's good that they do. This kid's a football player, and if we could hit stop and everything would stop, we'd run out on the field and get him down, but we can't. So he's gonna finish those runs.
We saw how explosive the offense can be when Bryce runs. Again, I think the Nebraska defense is going to be a much harsher test. So it'll be interesting to see how often he runs, when he runs, and what kind of how much physicality Nebraska's defense can bring to him at the end of those runs.
Yeah, I think timing is really the key between Chip Lindsey and Bryce Underwood. And what I mean is I think Chip wants to make the reads on any given play that he designs or constructs or calls at a given time. He wants to make sure that the reads can happen quickly visually so that it's not looking from the right sideline all the way over to the left hash or vice versa, right? You're not making his head turn all the way from field, from sideline to sideline. Try to keep the reads kind of vertical in one visual window, maybe reading from short to deep or from deep to short, so that he can make quicker decisions. And then what seemed to me the big difference with Bryce in that week 3 game is they told him it's okay if you don't see it, if you're not comfortable, if you don't know what is happening, if you don't have a good feel for where the ball should go, pull it down and run. Because there were plays that there was a pass to make. There were guys open. There were plays where he wasn't under necessarily a ton of pressure. He had a clean pocket to step up and throw the ball into. But I think right now with a young quarterback, it makes sense to have that quick trigger of when in doubt, tuck the ball and go, make a positive play. We'll live to snap the ball again and we'll take whatever yards you can get. And he's such a good athlete. once he does that, once he makes that decision, that it puts a lot of pressure on the defense. I expect the Cornhuskers to do a couple specific things to try to keep Bryce Underwood actually in the pocket, because they want to make him read and process and use his brain so that his feet kind of get stuck in the mud in there. And he's capable of doing that. He's capable of hurting this team from the pocket. But the key will be trying to make sure that he still is acting decisively and making quick decisions, rather than letting the gears kind of spin and spin and spin. Whether he makes a mistake or not, you want to make a quick decision, I think.
Well, it reminds me of one of the things that Chip Lindsey said all the way back in spring practice.
He's very advanced physically, and I think for him, the speed of the game is always something you worry about, coming into college compared to high school. And then how much can he handle? But really that goes with all of them. Jaden Davis has not played a whole lot. Mikey's here now, and he's got some experience, but not at this level here. So it's all going to be a lot of fun to kind of mix and match it and put them in those situations. I think our job this spring is to put those quarterbacks all in different positions and see how they react. Who handles things when it's a third down pressure day, who handles it the best. When it's a red zone day, who does what we're supposed to do, who can manage the huddle, who can connect with the team. And, at the end of the day, it's about who affects the other 10 guys the best. I think it's the guy that's going to play.
Here, fourth game of the season on the road, we can look back to the Oklahoma game and again, Bryce wasn't uncaged to run, but he also struggled seeing things, right? He struggled seeing how the game developed. He struggled seeing receivers. So if Nebraska is going to basically dare Michigan to throw, it's all going to be about what Bryce can do. What does he see? How does he pick apart the defenses? How does he recognize the defensive alignment? How will Nebraska hide their coverage and then change pre-snap versus post-snap? And this is one of the things that when we look at Bryce, and yes, we've talked about it in the podcast, he's an amazing athlete. We saw how good he can be last week. But one of the things that he needs to gain his experience against top level athletes on defense. And, I think I said to you, when I saw him warming up on the field versus Oklahoma, it struck me as how unfair it would have been a year ago for him to be playing against typical high school players, right? Just that he was a next level athlete. And I think he was such a good athlete that he could out athlete many of the defenses and many of the defensive players he went against in high school. Well, when you get to the college level, he is an elite athlete, but that gap is much smaller. And I think he's going up against better coaching. He's going up against better defenses. And this is a Nebraska team that, again, coming in undefeated, scored 2 60-point victories in a row. I think they're coming in with some swagger that they haven't had for a while.
Yeah, and they're at home. The biggest concern for me in this game is how well they can communicate and function on the road. Again, I expect the game flow and the performance to look a little bit more like Oklahoma than it does Central Michigan, but not quite as disjointed on offense. And defensively, again, I think Rod Moore is going to help with smoothing out some of the communication issues in the secondary, but you absolutely cannot get burnt over the top on defense with double moves and letting Dylan Raiola push the ball down the field. This offense wants to be explosive, and Dylan Raiola was one of the top quarterbacks in his class last year and started the entire Big Ten season as a freshman, just like Underwood is trying to do this year. So he is, he's one step ahead in terms of that development, that maturation, because he's got a full season under his belt. But Michigan's defense really needs to try to create as much havoc and as much, kind of blurry the picture, gray the picture out for Dylan Raiola as possible. Because if you give him advantages that we're talking about with Bryce, then Dylan Raiola is fully capable of throwing over 300 yards and multiple touchdowns. And you just don't want to give him extra time to create and find guys on a scramble drill. They really are going to want to try to get into Riola's face, and then if you spill him out of the pocket, make sure that nobody is slipping behind you on the defense, because that is really where he really excels. Once he breaks the pocket and it turns into the scramble drill, he's got the athleticism to throw off platform a long ways, and nobody is out of his nobody's out of range wherever they are on the field when Rayola's got the ball. So it's a unique challenge. I know that Wink Martindale is kind of licking his chops because Michigan is going to be super aggressive in this game. They're going to bring 5+ rushers on a majority of their snaps, I think. And that means there's going to be some one-on-one coverage. So we've got to see those guys in the corners making sure that they're not biting on double moves and getting beat over the top for huge plays. If you get beat, if you give up some space and keep the ball in front of you, come up and make a tackle, then everybody's going to be fine with that. But we cannot see 35 and 40-yard bombs down the sideline because guys came up and bid on those stutter step moves.
So it's interesting because when you listen to the players talk about heading into this game, we've mentioned a lot how that Oklahoma game was an eye opener, right? Like, not a great thing. And the lesson that Jordan Marshall took from it is,
I would say what we learned is we bounced back. I would say that's the biggest thing is we bounced back. No matter who we played, we bounced back. And to see Bryce take that on the chin and say, yep, it's time to go back to work. And we have a lot of older guys. It's time to go back to work. And that's what Michigan's always been about, is putting your head down and going back to work. And I think we learned from that road game is we're going to play in more environments like that, and we're going to have to win on the road. So this one is exciting for us, and it's another challenge that we get to face and another stepping stone. And I think the guys are just embracing it. We get another chance to go on the road and play in a really cool environment and take it on the chest. And I'm just excited to see what this team does. And we have so many guys that can go make plays for us, and I think we're in a really good spot right now.
the bigger question for me is, did they learn the lesson when they struggled versus Oklahoma to be better prepared for this game? And it's interesting because I was looking back, and you talked about Wink Martindale, and early in fall camp he talked about how difficult the schedule was. And again, you look at this game, and first, I feel good about this game. Okay, I try to find a way to feel good about almost every game they're heading into. The thing that I wonder about this game is we have seen this defense, especially against Oklahoma, just miss making some huge plays and then give up a huge play, right? And I think about, the nightmare of this season for me was Michigan coming down right before the half, looking like they're going to, either tie it up or kick a field goal. And they miss the field goal, and the defense comes on and gives up the long drive. So instead of it being possibly tied or down 4 points headed into the half, they're down 14, right? So the question I have is, so you're going to have Rod Moore back. Awesome to see. Again, is he going to come back, full speed, ready to hit the ground running? And if Michigan gives up an early touchdown or two, like you said, over the top, how will this team respond emotionally? And can the offense bounce back? Because, we've talked a lot about Michigan saying they want to play complementary football, right? Well, I feel against Oklahoma, the offense let the defense down, but the defense also let the offense down. I mean, you had failures on both sides. So if something bad happens in the first quarter here and Michigan goes down 10 or 14 points, is it going to be here we go again, or are they going to have the resiliency to dig in and fight back? So this game looks a lot different to me now than it did 3 games ago. Um, I did not expect Nebraska's offense to be as successful as it has been. Again, they have a talented player at quarterback, but it looks like they've also built a pretty good offensive line, which harkens back to what they were known for in their glory days. And they also have some skilled players. So I think this is going to be a really great test for the Michigan defense. And, we're going to have to see. Biff Poggi talked a lot about, hey, what Bryce is like, and it's great to have him on our team.
I don't think anything changed. I think, look, you start learning about your team. It takes a while to learn about your team when you transition from spring ball to summer to camp. You really start learning the most when the games play. And I think what we're learning is what I said over here. Coaches don't win games. Plays don't win games. Players win games. And you have to let your players play.
But the question is, okay, so you're going to open up the playbook and you're going to let players play. What's going to happen when that happens? Because the game plan versus Oklahoma, they took the air out of the ball, they slowed everything down, and that means that it wasn't going to be a shootout. Means that you weren't going to be able to make up points really quickly, but you also weren't going to get down. What happens when they open up the playbook, and if Michigan has a couple quick 3-and-outs, and you basically reload the Nebraska offense out on the field and they start hitting early? What kind of challenges could Michigan face in this game in the first or second quarter, and whether they can weather them?
Yeah, I think you said it going into the Oklahoma game. You got to hold on through that emotional high at the beginning of a game, especially Big Ten opener. 3:30 start. A little bit of extra tailgating for everybody in the mornings, right? So the energy is going to be really, really, pulsating through that stadium through that first quarter. And a tie in the first quarter is a win for Michigan. If you can get through that initial surge of energy on the road, then I would definitely consider that a win. If they do make mistakes that cause them to fall behind, then that energy from the crowd just kind of compounds on top of itself, and now you're really in a hole. Not just putting points on the board in a short order, but just the emotion of trying to keep your composure in a pretty raucous environment. So I think it makes sense to make sure that they have simple reads for Bryce Underwood. I don't want to say that they should be conservative. I'm not advocating for trying to take air out of the ball. But I think it does have to be a very strict game plan for Bryce. This read. If you didn't see it, tuck it and go, so that he's got, by the time that clock after the snap gets to 3 seconds, he's already made a decision. The ball's out of his hand, or he's no longer a sitting duck. He's now an offensive weapon and trying to run the ball. So I think that kind of infuses him with confidence, and maybe Michigan can make a big play and suck the energy right out of the crowd right away early in the first quarter. That would be a huge benefit. But defensively, they just have to stay consistent and avoid giving up the big play. I really feel like they're going to create negative plays against this Nebraska offense. It's just a matter of whether or not they can avoid the really explosive plays. We remember when Rod Moore came back from injury a couple seasons ago. I remember he made his debut. I think it was against Rutgers, and he gave up a little slant route, no big deal, but he slipped and missed the tackle, and the kid from Rutgers took it to the house. And really, that is what Michigan, I don't think, can afford. It's just one of those explosive plays where not only are you down a score, down 7, down 10, but now the place is just rocking, and the lights are flashing, and not only do you have to come back, but you got to do it under immense pressure and really in tough conditions for communication.
Absolutely. And Jordan Marshall talked about the importance and the goal of what they wanted.
We kind of talked about it today. Is we just want to go 1-0 in the Big Ten play, and I think that's every team's goal in the Big Ten is to go 1-0. So 1-0. So how do we do that? And I think that's just being physical and tough. The Big Ten is all about being tough, and it really comes down to O-line play and D-line play, and it's going to be exciting to go in their place and get to play.
I think that's the thing about this team, right? So one of the things that strikes me when we talk to the players and the coaches is despite what happened last season, there's the residue of the national championship season. There's still a swagger. There's still a confidence that last year was the outlier in a bad way. And, you got Jimmy Rolder this week saying, definitely they have the talent to match almost anyone in the nation. But this game is a really important pivot point because, you head into this game on the road, you take care of business, you come back 3-1, right? And, you're right on schedule and life is good, and you head into the bye week and you're feeling really good. And yet, if somehow you don't win this game, you're 2-2, you've struggled twice on the road, and you got a whole week to stew in it. So one of the things that I think will be interesting is, on one hand, you can say, well, and it's interesting because one of the things that Biff Poggi said is, players play the game. It's not coaches, right? Well, that's true. And yet, this will be the second week without Sharon Moore. The team all alluded to in the run-up to the Central Michigan game and post-game that they were real fired up to win the game for Sharon. Well, now you're heading on the road, and, how much of that emotion are you out, runs out, and now it's just, you're just playing the game, right? And, they asked Biff Poggi, what was it like to coach in the big house?
Well, to be very honest with you, I was quite anxious during the week, and my anxiety was from not wanting to let Sharon down or any of the Michigan fans down or do anything like that. As soon as I hit the tunnel, I realized I've done this 300 and some times, and football's football, honestly. It's whether you're playing it out back and there's nobody there, or you're playing it in the biggest stadium in the country, whether it's Pop Warner or the NFL. It's all just football. And if you're a football guy, it's just football. And that's the truth.
And on one hand, I get that, but okay, it's one thing to be coaching in the big house with a really friendly crowd, and it's another thing to go on the road, hostile environment. So I think we're going to have a lot to watch mentally, how the team and how the coaches respond. So one of the things that impressed me versus Oklahoma is that, Sharon was on the sideline, extorting everybody, encouraging everybody, and he seemed to calm things down. Even though, they couldn't come back and win, he's kind of a force that brings down the negative emotions. So obviously there were no negative emotions to calm versus Central Michigan, but road game, Nebraska, that's a whole nother thing, right? And again, you can hear the confidence of the players that there's still this feeling of, we were recent national champions. We're going to be there again. We're going to be competing again. And I love the confidence. But I got to tell you, after sitting through some of those games last year, last year was a wake up call. It was a splash of cold water, and that's how that Oklahoma game felt. So if things don't go right out of the gate versus Nebraska, how will they bounce back? How will they respond? And I think for me, that's going to be one of the biggest questions and biggest things that I'll be tracking.
Yeah, that's the kind of stuff that comes down to leadership, and especially with El Hadi out sidelined again. You got to look at guys like Max Bredesen and Marlon Klein on the offensive side, and why I said again, I think getting Rod Moore back is a huge benefit in this game, even as he knocks the rust off physically. So I kind of see this game a little bit of kind of looking into the mirror a little bit. I think both defensive units are certainly a couple steps ahead of their own team's offensive units. So I expect it to be relatively low scoring, as long as Michigan can avoid giving up any big explosive plays. I don't think it's going to get outside of one score in either direction, and it's going to come down to who can execute and make plays in the big moments in the second half. I really think I think Bryce Underwood will execute and have a good game. I don't think he's going to be. I don't think he's going to kind of put the cape on in the fourth quarter. I think it's going to come down to the defense having to make a really big play and either set up an easy score or kind of snatch points away from the Cornhuskers late in the game. So right now I see Michigan winning a close one here. I'm going to say 24-20 on the road. And I think this is really the springboard of confidence that Michigan needs to really believe in themselves as a Big Ten championship contender and a playoff contender.
Well, I'm also picking Michigan to win, and yet one of the areas that I think we really need to see bounce back is we need the field goal kicking to get online, right? And I'll tell you, we talk about this quarter season checkpoint. And, when I look at the offense, it's about where I expected it to be. The defense is about where I expected it to be. I'm concerned about where we are in field goal and special teams right now. I'm concerned where we are in the return game. I'm concerned where we are in field goals. You have Dominic Zavada, who was lights out last year, and he is not right now. So what I'm hoping for in this game is I'm hoping Michigan's going to pull it out 30-27, and I'm hoping Zavada is the difference. And, that's a vote of confidence for him because, we've seen him be lights out last season. And, it's one of those things with special teams players. He really needs to get his confidence back because we know physically he can do the job. And hopefully on the road, this will be the difference in a positive way. And I'll tell you, when I'm looking at this quarter season checkpoint, the special teams concern me. So I need him to come back strong. And I don't know where we are in the return game right now. I after watching, I watched rewatched most of the 3 games prepping for this, and I'm still concerned there. So hopefully that won't be the difference in a bad way. I have a nagging feeling that it could be, and I'm hoping I'm wrong.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to the same thing for me as always. Just catch the ball in the air and hold on to it. don't turn the ball over for sure, and avoid giving up those hidden yards on punts where you let the ball hit the ground and roll past you for 20 yards. We got to give the offensive unit and Bryce Underwood every leg up that we can, and sometimes that's just fair catching the ball and avoiding the punt and roll. And I think Samaj Morgan is a really, really important player in this game. We don't need him to step up and make out of this world plays on special teams, but we need him to look consistent and look like he's got a handle on it when the ball's in the air.
And the big thing about special teams, when we've talked about this before, is it's like the medical oath: do no harm, catch the ball, don't fumble the ball. Hey, if you can get a nice return, great. But letting that ball hit the ground and bounce, again, on the road, not a great look. And, I love Samaj Morgan as a player. I think he has the potential, but, he got taken out of that Oklahoma game with that late cheap hit, and he wasn't the same player that game. And I think that, he could be a player both on offense and special teams that really stars in this game between his experience and the opportunities that I think he'll get. So I'm hoping that's what we'll see.
Yeah, a lot of faith in him as a playmaker. I know that's where he is, and he's always trying to hit the home run. He's going to get up there and take the big swings, and I like that about him. I don't want that to change. I just hope that he can add the reps to be consistent. Maybe it's little bit better alignment on the punt return. Maybe he's playing a little bit too deep and trying to come up and make these catches on the run. I'm not sure, but hopefully they get that ironed out and keep putting him in positions to succeed so that he can make the routine plays without it being an adventure. And then when he does get the opportunity with some space, we know he can be electric.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the UMGoBlue.com podcast. This is Phil Callahan along with
Clint Derringer.
Go Blue.
Go Blue.
The last message he gave was not play for him, play for us. Be the best us we can possibly be, of course. That was our main goal going into this game, dominate the best we can. So we feel like if we, cross our T's and dot our I's, of course, every single week of practice, this is how the outcome will be. We'll be dominating. We'll be the best us we could possibly be, no matter who we are, who we playing, of course. So, yeah.
Thank you for listening to the UMGoBlue.com podcast. All rights reserved. Hello, welcome to this edition of the UMGoBlue.com podcast. This is Phil Callahan along with
Clint Derringer.
Look, you start learning about your team. It takes a while to learn about your team when you transition from spring ball to summer to camp. You really start learning the most when the games play. And I think what we're learning is what I said over here. Coaches don't win games. Plays don't win games. Players win games. And you have to let your players play.
We're going to talk about Michigan's road victory, winning by a score of 30-27 over the Nebraska Cornhuskers. Well, Clint, what'd you think about that one?
Well, a road win in the Big Ten, especially against 3-0 Nebraska team, solid team, and a program that really needed a big win. A lot of energy in that stadium. Definitely nothing to turn your nose up at for Michigan. You'll take every road win in D1 college football, especially in the conference, but that one especially, I think, was well earned. I mean, a lot to clean up. All three phases of the game. We've got a lot to talk about, but when it all boils down, a 30-27 victory against Nebraska in Lincoln, heading into a bye week to kind of self-evaluate, self-scout, heal up, rest a couple guys. I think they're in a good spot. 3-1 after 4 games heading into the bye week. I'll take it, and that's about where I thought we'd be.
I will definitely take the win. Definitely, there were some things I was frustrated by, things that we're going to talk about as we break the game down. I felt better after the game though when I again, like you said, it's a road victory. Also saw that Oklahoma won, so that makes that road loss a little bit better. But this is the kind of game that I feel like last year at this time we would have lost. And I think that's the thing that made me feel better, that definitely some things went against didn't go Michigan's way. There were some mistakes. The offense wasn't nearly as consistently explosive as we would have liked. But again, got the win, and definitely, when you see how crazy that stadium is, and you see that Nebraska is really trying to assert themselves, and we talked about this in the pregame podcast that Nebraska had scored over 50 points in the previous two games. So when you put it in perspective, it's a lot easier to take.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, fourth game for Bryce Underwood, second road game. He is on the steep end of the learning curve. So every one of these experiences, every little bit of success is a huge building block and a big step forward. So you got to take this for what it's worth. A win is a win for sure. And there's a lot more good here than there's bad. But there are still some patterns of weakness that this team needs to clean up in order to continue winning and to win some tougher road games in the future. But man, it was satisfying to watch. It was nice to see the run game kind of lead the way for the offense. It was nice to see the offensive line get some push. And on the flip side, man, was it good to see the defensive line manhandling Nebraska's O-line. I mean, there was no doubt who dominated the line of scrimmage when the Cornhuskers had the ball. And Dylan Raiola had a heck of a game. 30 for 41, 308 yards, 3 touchdowns. In the face of the pressure that Michigan was putting on him, tip of my cap to Dylan Raiola, just a second-year player for Nebraska. He's really, really good, but it was a super satisfying win to beat that team in a spot that they needed to win when their best player really played his butt off. And it feels good to come back to Ann Arbor 3-1.
I got to give it to Dylan Raiola because he was sacked 7 times. And the way he was hassled by the Michigan defense, I was wondering if he was going to be able to finish the game, and he finished the game great. I mean, he took a beating, he kept going, and definitely he's going to be a quarterback to watch moving forward. So the thing that I really was gratified in watching the game was how the Michigan defense just basically answered the call in that first quarter. Okay. And you can say part of it is Nebraska maybe wilting a little bit with the attention, but very easily Nebraska could have scored at least twice in that first quarter on the first 2 drives, and the Michigan defense answered the call. And for Michigan to end that first quarter, winning 10-0, and Zavada got back on track with a 46-yard field goal. Bryce Underwood had a 37-yard touchdown rush. I mean, that first quarter went about as well as it could have gone for Michigan, both offensively and defensively. And if anything, if I'm irritated by the rest of the game, it's just how good I felt at the end of quarter 1. And, of course, heading into that second quarter, Michigan busted that huge run with Justice Haynes, 75-yard touchdown run. And again, the Michigan offense just showing that while it may have trouble breaking off 5 and 10-yard runs, it can bust the long runs. And while I understand people are frustrated that the running game isn't more consistent in the short game, as long as we're getting those big gains and scores, I think we will make do while they figure the other out. I think the frustrating thing for me was, Nebraska coming back with the 17 points in the second quarter, and that last touchdown as time expired on the Hail Mary was a pretty bitter pill to for me to swallow. And honestly, I think that's the thing that really kind of fouled my mood for the game. If you take that away, I think I'm feeling okay. But the way they let them, the circumstances of that Hail Mary and how they let them come back, frustrated me a lot.
Yeah, definitely. That's understandable. One quick thing about the run game, they had Michigan had a 46% success rate on running plays, and that is almost exactly the benchmark that I set kind of internally in our conversations for where this team needs to be. 46 or better game to game and on the season in the run game, I think is where they need to be. 50% is the best that we've seen even into the Harbaugh era, but 46% success rate really is kind of a bellwether, and that would be on par with what we saw in 2021 with Hassan Haskins and Blake Corum. So I think that run game right there, if you're getting 46% success rate plus the explosiveness that we saw from both guys, not only Haynes breaking off the 75-yarder, but then you get Jordan Marshall a 54-yarder for a touchdown in the third quarter. It kind of backs up what we said, that to this point, Haynes has been just kind of the lucky beneficiary of the better blocked plays. And when they gave Jordan Marshall a well-blocked play, I think it was another inside zone or duo play where they got up onto the linebackers, and Jordan Marshall showed that he can take it to the house. So a lot of good there. But when you bring up the end of the half, absolutely, if they don't win this game, you and I are screaming our lungs out about the way they ended the second quarter. They get the touchdown from Haynes right at the 2-minute timeout. So there's just under 2 minutes left. They kick the extra point, they kick off. So Nebraska's got the ball with 1:56 on the clock, and both teams have all three timeouts. They get a couple first downs. They get out to about midfield. There's about a minute left. I don't recall exactly. Let's say it's 1:06. And I think it was second down. Michigan gets a big sack, or maybe it was first down, gets a big sack to set up something like 2nd and 19. And right at that moment, in my opinion, Michigan needed to take timeout. There's 50 approximately seconds left. You've now forced Nebraska onto their back foot. They're clearly not going to be trying to pick up. They're going to have to force the ball down the field if they want to score, to even get into field goal range. They're going to have to take some risk. And your defensive line has been obliterating their offensive line. So to me, the aggressive play, the aggressive decision for the head coach, Biff Poggi, in this situation would have been to take time out immediately after that sack. And then Nebraska showed they wanted to turtle. They ran the ball on second down. They ran the ball on third down. And there were no timeouts by Michigan, allowing the Cornhuskers to run the clock down to 1 second left and get a free play, no risk, on 4th and 11, chuck it to the end zone, and then no defensive player makes a play and it's a touchdown. So the actual execution of that Hail Mary play, is kind of a random number generator. Where's the ball going to come down? Who goes up and make a play? Are you in position? It's kind of like a rebound in basketball. There's a lot of randomness there. But from that first down sack at midfield forward, Biff Poggi absolutely screwed the pooch on that. And it circles back to, is there a cost with all of these off the field battles with the NCAA and the Big Ten, and you get your head coach suspended, and it almost cost Michigan in this game? It was a big deal in that moment. Maybe Sharon Moore makes the same mistake. I don't know. But for sure, Biff Poggi did not do what he needed to do as the head coach in that spot.
So what frustrated me was at the end of that second quarter, it reminded me in a different way of the end of the second quarter in Oklahoma, right? Where Michigan's coming down, and instead of being turned away like they were in Oklahoma, They scored. Oh, this is great. Okay, awesome. And in Oklahoma, they didn't score, and they let Oklahoma run down. And instead of being in a much more favorable position heading into the half, they were down 14-0, right? So in this game, Michigan at least scored. They let Nebraska come down. And, one of the things that Biff Poggi talks about.
As soon as I hit the tunnel, I realized I've done this 300 and some times. And football's football, honestly. It's whether you're playing it out back and there's nobody there, or you're playing it in the biggest stadium in the country, whether it's Pop Warner or the NFL. It's all just football. And if you're a football guy, it's just football. And that's the truth.
What frustrates me is, having been involved with a high school program for a long time, as you were, right? Whenever I see a mistake that if a high school team made it, I would scream, I scream at the collegiate level, okay? So here is Biff talking about, oh, I coach all these different levels, I'm great. Hey, man, if you made that mistake at a junior high team, somebody would scream at you, right? And I think, like you said, hey, watching that last 30 or 40 seconds, it was very obvious Nebraska just wanted to get to the halftime, right? And it looked like that's what Biff wanted too. And I'm frustrated by it, is that, so, with 10 seconds to go, it's fourth down, and I see Nebraska letting the clock run down, and I'm screaming at them, what are you doing? What are you doing? Like, I thought they were making the mistake and not trying to do the Hail Mary, right?
Mhm.
And then they call a timeout, and I'm like, so again, there's so many mistakes in that last minute and a half that it's just move and counter move. You call the timeout, you do this. And with all the coaching talent on actually both sidelines, right? I'm shocked that usually there's an assistant whose job is to exactly be in the head coach's ear saying, hey, you need to do this. Hey, you need to do this. And whether they do it or not, there's supposed to be somebody there saying, hey, option, you should do this, right? And I wonder whose job that was, right? Now, I don't know what I'm more upset by, that we had that clock mismanagement, okay, amateur hour, okay, just miscommunication, whatever. And then, according to Biff, after the game, they had no problem with it. He said, we're beating the snot out of them. Hey, you know what? I hope somebody got chewed on, okay? And I understand not doing that in front of the team, but that is the moment where I feel as if wherever Sharon was watching the game, he was swearing at the television, right? Because if you and I see it, and the announcers see it, and pretty much all of Twitter saw it, right? Anybody who watches football, move, timeout, move, counter move, here's what you do. Like, it's like the end of a basketball game where you just start fouling people. You know what's going to happen. Everybody knows what's going to happen. And at that moment, that was really disappointing. So again, instead of 17-10 headed to the half, whoa, Nebraska's hits that Hail Mary, boom, you light that fire in that stadium again, and then you got a game, right? You have put them back in the game. And yes, it all worked out in the end, but 30-27, that's, and again, the great thing is that we don't rely on the polls nearly as much as we used to. But and you and I talked about it. Hey, if you take that touchdown off the board, it's 30-20 and we feel pretty good, right? But you can't, and it's 30-27. Now, thankfully, Michigan came back in the third quarter and pitched a shutout, scored a touchdown and another field goal. As you mentioned, Jordan Marshall had that 54-yard run. So when Nebraska comes back in the fourth quarter and scores 10 and Zavada answers with 3, we end up 30-27. And on one hand, maybe this was the kind of resilience that the team needed to show on the road. I'll definitely take the win. But as you mentioned, hey, I sure as heck hope that I don't see mismanagement like this later in the season. I hope it was due to, Sharon not being there. But if I'm Sharon or I'm Biff, I have lots of questions on how that happened. And, maybe he made the decision just to, hey, let's just go to half. But it was not great football coaching in that last minute and a half on either side. And like you said, it appeared Nebraska was more than happy to turtle, and that kind of surprised me too. So again, the whole way that went down was, uh, you know, if it's shown in a coaching clinic, it's going to be shown what not to do, right? I mean, I think that's the thing that I came away with.
And that's the one X factor, I guess, for me, is that Matt Rule bungled the whole thing as well, and that could be confusing. So, like I said, Michigan gets that sack, and Nebraska's way behind the chains, and then they run the ball. All right, that's a sign that they just want to get to halftime. Well, if they want to get to halftime, you should be trying to put pressure on them. They should have taken the timeout, like I said. But then Nebraska takes the timeout. It's like, oh, okay, maybe they are going to try to figure out how to at least get close enough to give their kicker a chance. I don't know, if he has a really strong leg or not, whatever. So when Nebraska takes that first timeout, it's like, okay, they're going to try to stay on offense. But coming out of the timeout, they run the ball. And even, the broadcast crew for CBS is like, oh, so they called a timeout and then ran the ball for 5 yards coming out of it. So I could see in real time, in the heat of the moment, that being confusing enough to not know exactly what to do. Because like you said, the end of a basketball game, it's kind of written, this, that. It's like tic-tac-toe, right? It's not chess. It's much more simplistic. And once Matt Rule did something that was strange, I think everybody's brain maybe got wiped on the Michigan sideline. But as soon as it was at 10 seconds left, it's a free play for Nebraska. Even if Michigan were to call timeout at 10 seconds, Nebraska still is going to run, rail out to the far right sideline and heave the ball to the end zone, because that play takes 10 seconds, right? So once it was 10 seconds or less, it's free Hail Mary time. And the reason that the Hail Mary exists is because sometimes it hits. So anyway, again, I like Biff. I'm sure he's a fully capable coach. One weird scenario, one bad situation doesn't change my whole opinion of the guy. Again, I would circle back to just stop getting your head coach suspended. Would be great for the program that I follow. I'd love it if the head coach was just on the sideline for every game, every season. That'd be cool. And of course, in the moment, Biff's not going to dwell on whoever made the mistake, even if it's him, right? If he just said, that's on me, I made a mistake, it's a 0-0 game, we've got to go win the second half. That would have been probably the perfect answer. The fact that he's like, it doesn't matter, it's football, we're beating the snot out of them, that's kind of a different version of the same answer, in my opinion, minus the, him putting his hand up and saying, my bad. So in the grand scheme, not a huge deal, but needs to be acknowledged that was not well managed. And there's been a little bit of a pattern of some weird clock management the last 2 seasons, and hopefully they spend some time in this upcoming bye week and tighten that up, and certainly look at, do they need to assign an assistant coach or some staffer to help manage these situations at the end of a half and at the end of the game.
So one of the things that Sharon mentioned a few weeks ago is that they do analytics, right? And again, I'll just come back to, okay, I mean, all the way back to early in Harbaugh's tenure, okay, they were using analytics in a very interesting way, right? Meaning that I didn't agree with some of the decisions they made, and we had photos of assistants standing on the sideline with analytics folders, right? And we went to the PR people at Michigan and said, hey, what are you doing with this company? And they came back and said, we're not doing anything with this company, to which I showed them the picture of, no, you are right here, right? And then, so we know that Harbaugh was using analytics. And we've had discussions with him. He's addressed it throughout the years. I think ultimately Harbaugh is aware of analytics, but I really think he's a gut guy. Okay. And we've talked about instances where he went with his gut, and I may not have agreed, but I think ultimately with somebody with that experience, I think he's more than okay and capable of relying on his gut, right? So Sharon addressed early this year that they're using analytics, right?
For us, there's all those type of decisions that you got to make, and there's an analytics piece of it, but there's also a feeling of how you feel in the game in those certain situations of how the defense is playing and what you're doing. So it's a collective thought process when we do that for sure.
And you get the analytics answer in real time.
Oh yeah, you get the analytics answer in real time. Yeah, this says 4th or 2, 4th or 1 or better, 4th or 4 or better, and sometimes when it says 4th or 5 or better, I'm like, I don't know about that one. It's a long distance at certain times, so usually just go with the gut.
To me, when you get under 2 minutes, that should be one of the times that not only are you looking at the analytics, but you have your script. They do this, we do that. They do this, we do that, right? And even if you call a timeout just to talk to your Hail Mary defense team to say, hey guys, you know what's going to happen here, right? You slow the game down. You say, hey, yeah, you know what they're going to do, okay? You're not really giving the offense that much help by calling another timeout. You let your defenders know, hey, everybody, this is going to happen, And then I think the only question on that play is, do you rush more, right? And it's interesting like you said, the defensive line was eating Nebraska alive, and then they called the rush off. So it happens, like you said. There's a reason it's called a Hail Mary. It rarely works, but when it does, you remember it and it hurts. And it definitely jolted Michigan a little bit and gave Nebraska a charge to get back in this game. The great news was that Michigan just dominated the third quarter. So again, Michigan wins by a score of 30-27, and yet we saw some persistent problems rearing their ugly head. And that was, not the best work on special teams yet again.
Yeah, I think there's a clear shortfall there. It's something that can be cleaned up. It's coachable. But to me, anytime on the punt return unit, anytime that the ball touches the ground, it's a problem. Now, that particular punter for Nebraska was really, really tough. First of all, they said that he was capable of punting with either foot. I didn't pay attention to see whether he had actually rolled right and kicked. I thought that he rolled left most times, but the reason those Australian rules football players are so tough in the punt game, because that rollout gives the coverage team more time to get down the field, right? Because the time that rollout takes, those guys are 10 yards further down the field by the time the foot meets the ball. So those guys are right on top of you, and certainly that puts more pressure on the punt returner. I just think we need to check on Samaj's alignment. I still think he aligns too deep. I would rather see a punt go over his head at this point in a game. Play too shallow and challenge the other team to try to kick it over your head, rather than what you would think would be standard of staying deep and then coming forward. Because I think he just plays a little bit too deep and tries to make catches on the run. And in this game, he started deep, and the ball was struck by the punter. And it looked to me like he was dropping back deeper, and the ball actually landed really short and rolled an extra 15 yards, and they netted like 56 yards on that particular punt, I think. So it's just hidden yardage. I know that I focus on it far too much, but in this game, Nebraska's net punting 49.8, 50 yards of net punting for Nebraska. Michigan 35.8. right? So that's a 14-yard gain every time the teams trade punts. It's a first down every single time. And this is how Iowa, for decades, moved the ball down the field, literally, by trading punts. They gain 10 to 15 yards every time you trade punts. All of a sudden, they start at the 50, and they manage to get a field goal or a touchdown. And that's, right now Michigan's on the wrong end of that, and it's something they've been really good at recently. They need to get it fixed.
Well, Clint, when you mention Iowa, I think back to the 1996 game where Michigan tried one of those rolling punts, and it went poorly, right, which led to Michigan losing. And whenever I see that formation, I just have horrible flashbacks. I remember calling it the rolling blunder, right? Just Michigan did it once. They barely got the punt off, and you're like, I don't think that's working. Don't do it again. And the next time it got blocked, and things went bad. So definitely Nebraska executes it with more precision than Michigan did. But whenever I see that, that's the negative PTSD flashback I have. So again, love Samaj. He did not have a great game. You think back to Donovan Edwards last year, who we would joke that, he had such a good arm that maybe we'd see him at quarterback with the different guys going out, and him executing, that halfback pass so well, right? And then we saw Samaj, and I'm sure he's run it 50 times in practice. Great. He did not throw the ball well against Nebraska. And again, I feel for Samaj because he, in the Oklahoma game, he had that late hit that kind of, knocked him off his feet. And it still feels like that he's struggling to find his rhythm, right? And again, great guy to talk to. He's doing his best, but between the issues on special teams and his lackluster passing attempt, and coming down with 2 passes for 22 yards, you feel that for this offense to really catch gear, he's going to need to be that guy. He's going to need to catch fire, and he hasn't yet.
And he really, in the fourth quarter, there was a big first down conversion that he made where he ran through a tackler, right? He gained 2 yards after contact just on will and strength running through. And Samaj, being a smaller wide receiver, he has shown that he's a pretty tough runner. He reminds me a little bit of Golden Tate in that way when he's got the ball in his hands on the perimeter. So again, I echo everything you said. I love the kid, and I know that he can be explosive. We've got to clean up some of the fundamental stuff because we want to give him as many opportunities to be explosive as possible. Punt return's a great spot for him. Those bubble and slip screens are great opportunities for him. He's got to execute so that we're not just lighting it down on fire on offense when we call those things. So I hope that we see more of what we saw in the fourth quarter. And underthrowing the trick play, it definitely happens. I bet you with adrenaline, when you see somebody that wide open, the instinct is to fire it and overthrow it and make it completely uncatchable. At least that ball that he threw was catchable. I think McCauley just did not expect it to be short when he was so open, and he actually outran it. So it is what it is. Again, luckily, Michigan was able to do what was necessary to get past those mistakes and get out with a win. And by the time we get to the end of the season, these things that we're harping on right now will be long in the rearview mirror. We won't remember.
So when we look at the stats, Justice Haynes had 17 carries for 149 yards and a touchdown, and of course that 75-yard score. Jordan Marshall had 6 carries for 80 with that 54-yard score, and Bryce Underwood, 8 carries for 61 yards, right, and another touchdown. Underwood was 12 for 22 passing for 105 yards. Would have liked to have seen, more yardage, more completions, right? At receiver, McCulley had 3 for 39. Haynes had 3 for 12. Morgan had 2 for 22. Klein had 2 for 21. You made a great point when we were going back and forth during the game. I keep expecting McCulley to be the deep threat, right? To get more separation downfield. And you made a great point that him staying in is actually helping with coverage. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, I think they want to push the ball down the field to McCulley. I'm sure that they would like to be able to do that, but these situations on the road where they want Bryce to make quick decisions, I don't think they want to drop him deep in the pocket and have him stand there like a sitting duck and then fire the ball down the field, which is kind of what we would be hoping for. Kind of a play action look, 7-step drop or 3 or 5-step drop from the shotgun, sitting there in the pocket and then, hitch and let it fly to McCulley. I'm sure that's in the playbook and they will do that. But these early season games on the road, when the run game, especially on Saturday, was working, I think Chip Lindsey is passing on those opportunities right now, more because of the protection questions and Bryce, kind of standing there and his processing speed. I think in the later part of the season, we will see more of those deep threats or deep shots, especially to Donovan McCulley. So I wouldn't give up on that hope, that thought right now. I think it's more about Bryce's processing speed and maybe some pass protection question marks, especially with still both guards were out in this game. So the run success and what they were doing that was working, it's kind of like if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So, I definitely would like to see the same thing that you were describing, but I don't think it's a knock on McCulley or his ability or Chip Lindsey being able to see that that's what needs to happen. I think the question marks actually come down to processing in the pocket and pass protection up front.
It was good to see Zavada get back on track with 3 field goals, a 46-yard, a 56-yard, and a 21-yard. He'd been uncharacteristically missing early this season, so it was good to see that. And again, that was a difference in the game. So definitely good to see him getting back on track. Now, we've talked about the defense a little bit, but man, that defense, 7 sacks, just, and again, good on Raiola for being able to take that beating. But, it's weird watching this defense because on one hand, I see 27 points and I'm unhappy. Okay. And yet they're so dominant at times. So it's interesting. And Barham is just, just flying all over the place, just hammering people and causing chaos.
On Jay-Sean, yes. The update, he might be a superhero. We're doing a DNA swab right now, but he could be.
So it's weird because on one hand, I look at the points and I go, oh, the defense isn't as good as I would have hoped. But at times they were. And again, I think, when I look at the way they're rotating players through, one of the things that Wink talked about was
defensively, I think our best goal that we talked about, and the players were talking about it, is that you shouldn't be able to tell what 11's on the field. And, that's a goal that we're striving for. We're not there. We're not even close to being there yet, but we will be.
And, they were consistent last year in doing that, even as the team struggled, and it paid dividends by the end of the year. So it seems like, and Wink has talked about this. He would rather he wants the 11 in there to be able to go full bore all the time. And that means you're going to rotate guys. So hopefully the rotation brings up the experience and the talent level of everybody. And, I think what it comes down to too is that as much as Michigan's defense is reloading, you really have to look back and appreciate how great Mason Graham was and how great Kenneth Grant was. So there, you have great players there, coming in to reload, but you had two generational talents on the D line at the same time. And I think that's what I'm seeing is, if there's any drop off, it's just because these guys don't have that experience set. It doesn't mean they're not going to get there, but you also have to tip your hat to the guys you had, for several seasons and how just awesome they were.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to go back to the third quarter. Jordan Marshall gets the 54-yard touchdown run. There's 5 minutes left in the quarter. Michigan's up 10, I think, at that point, 27-17. Okay. That next series, Nebraska gets the ball at their own 25 after a touchback. It's a quick pass to the left, -4. It's a quick pass to the right, incomplete. And then another quick pass to the left, -3. Right? So they're getting the ball out of his hands because your offensive line is just getting totally eaten alive by the defensive line. And Jayshon Barham, again, playing mostly at edge, still dropping a couple times, but we've seen other edge players like Guy and Derek Moore in those drop rolls too. So I think Jayshon Barham is moved to edge for 2 games in a row now that we've seen. But anyways, so you get that 3 and out. And I'm sitting there with my kids watching, of course, on the TV, and they extend the drive because of a stupid, unsportsmanlike conduct penalty by Brandon Hillman. The taunting of the sideline, the taunting of the other players, giving them a free 15 yards and a free first down. That drive was dead, dead, -7 on 3 plays. And they punted back, and Michigan should have had the ball right near midfield, up 10, as the fourth quarter is about to start. Put the game on ice. That's what a championship team would do. Right? Taunting the other team gains what? The trash talking part of it. There's a thin line between swagger and stupid, and that is totally unnecessary. Okay, and maybe this is my get off my lawn moment, but that is there's no reason to risk the penalty that then pulled that series for Nebraska out of the fire, and they get all the way into the red zone and eventually kick a field goal. After another sack kind of finally stalls them down near the 10-yard line, they have to settle for a field goal because down 10, you can't bypass the points there. So instead of Michigan really being able to bury Nebraska the way that they should have because of how they were playing physically up front, another just mental mistake from somebody who's played a lot of football for Michigan. He's an upperclassman. Brandon Hillman cannot be making that mistake in bigger spots in the future. It will cost Michigan a game. And these are the types of things that compiled in 2024 that need to go away if we want Michigan to be back at a championship level in 25.
Well, and again, a stupid error, right? Something that you don't need to do. And what's interesting is, so in the summer or fall camp, okay, it happened at the end of the summer, but fall camp, you got the thing from Sharon that we're not going to be planting flags, right? And first of all, I love that they planted the flag at Ohio State, even while dodging pepper spray in the celebration. It was amazing. Great time. One of my best Michigan memories, especially in Columbus, okay? But the point is, okay, that what I took from that was, hey, we're going to be reining in, we're going to try to focus more on sportsmanship, right? And I think the quote was, shake hands after the game, show sportsmanship, be cordial, right? But I took it to be bigger than that, right? That you weren't going to get the taunting, that, you have, okay, so we have the sign gathering saga, right? We have your coach being sat down for it. And, we had the thing against New Mexico where one of Michigan's players was flipping the camera off, towards one of the opposing teams, right? You don't hear anything about it. Okay. Now, I know, having been near the field, all kinds of things are said, all kinds of things are done, right? But it's on the broadcast. Doesn't get addressed. So then you have this taunting. And the story is Sharon's not there. So again, if you're trying to be better at sportsmanship, you need to do it, right? You need to walk the walk. And I'm all for having swagger, but when it starts, putting the game in jeopardy, and it's interesting because there were a couple points in availability where, people would ask about, because that wasn't the first time. Okay. Media would say, "Hey, what are you doing?" Right. And there was just a shrug like, "Hey," and again, it's, there is a fine line between um, letting the players be who they are, right, and letting it kind of drip over the game and cause problems. And again, like you said, maybe this is my get off the lawn moment, right? And when you see, um, again, you saw it on the broadcast. There was no disputing what he did, right? It's like, come on, what are you doing, right? So I struggle with it, okay? Because again, hey, if you're going to beat Central Michigan 63-3 and talk a little bit, okay. In this game on the road, you really, took what could have been a stranglehold on the game and you put Nebraska right back, giving them opportunity. So that's my gripe.
I wanted to highlight the fine line, right? The fine line. So 2021 at Nebraska is where we hear Harbaugh for the first time say, take their music and make it our music, right? And that was what really kind of a turning point with how Michigan as a program played on the road. So there is kind of like embracing the hate and embracing the environment and kind of standing there with your chest out and puffed up and understanding that there's a brashness to that I certainly understand. Um, and then there's, Michael Barrett after the game in Happy Valley against Penn State in 2023 says into the camera, be careful who you make the villain. Be careful who you make the villain. And after that week with the saga with the Big Ten, and is Harbaugh going to be suspended or not? And then he is suspended. And Sharon Moore's got tears running down his face in the post-game interview, right? It's, we were all in on that, right? So it's a super fine line. It's a super fine line. And Michigan certainly plants itself right on top of that fine line. And sometimes they're over it and sometimes they're not. But I think the leaders of the team, the leaders of the program, need to take a little bit of time to reflect on where that line is and what the pros and cons are, when you cross it. And this particular instance, for sure, cost Michigan 3 points. That drive was dead, and it turned into a field goal, right? And Nebraska's probably down and out if they have to punt and Michigan ends up scoring to go up 17 or even 13 at the beginning of that fourth quarter. So, again, it's a road win. It's a positive day. There's way more good than bad. But these are things that are not just this game specific. These are patterns that we've seen over time that make the difference between Michigan being mediocre, being good, being okay, or playing championship level football. That's the thing. This is how you go from a B minus team to an A minus or an A team. And they've got to clean this stuff up.
So another thing that struck me watching this game was how frustrating it must be to be a Nebraska fan, because it seems like their MO at least against Michigan, is they play us really tough and then they lose, right? And watching this, it was, you know, it just seemed like a repeat of that. And you can't take it for granted, but you know, with how wound up that stadium was and how great their quarterback is and the way he kept bouncing back, I could definitely appreciate that you know, they have some frustration, and it'll be interesting to see how they finish out the season. You know, is this same old Nebraska, or you know, there were a lot of people talking about, hey, this is the third season, this is when they're gonna turn it up, and you know, watching it, unfortunately, like I said, I'm like, same Nebraska. So, and not that they're not game. Again, they, you know, we joke that Michigan is everybody's game that's circled on the schedule, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it certainly felt that way. And yet, you know, if you take that touchdown away, if you take that penalty away, this is a different game, and it's going to be interesting to see how the rest of the season shakes out. And, you know, again, as down as, you know, you think you can hear in my tone, I'm not super, super excited. Hey, we're 3-1. Hey, that's great. Okay. I will take that over 2-2 or worse, especially after last year. And there's definitely things to be excited. I mean, you can see the gears turning with Bryce. You can see him getting to the point where he is able to mesh his great talent with his experience level. And you can see glimpses of what's about to happen. You can see highlights yet to come, previews. And again, it's super exciting to see, especially heading into the bye week where, you know, you're getting Sharon Moore back. You're getting another 2 weeks for players to heal. And, you know, it'll be interesting to see what our offensive line looks like. Rod Moore made an appearance, so that's great. You know, I was starting to wonder, you know, if we were going to see him back or not. You know, I always hoped we would, but, you know, I had shades of Will Johnson last year. So it's great to see him back, and I think we're only going to see him more and more. And it'll be interesting to see what our offensive line looks like in 2 weeks against Wisconsin.
Yeah, a couple quick things. The positives going forward, right? Your defensive line absolutely dominated. You know, 7.5 sacks, 9.5 total tackles for loss. You're really deep at linebacker, so deep that you can put Barham on the edge. Cole Sullivan had another great game, made an absolutely great interception. He's a player. You're seeing true freshmen in the secondary getting time in the fourth quarter of a very close game. Shamari Earls is out there in the number 2 jersey. All of these guys are getting very, very valuable experience. Bryce Underwood is still showing that absolutely the sky is the limit for what he can do. And he has the right attitude, a tremendous work ethic, and he's getting better every single game, which is what you want from a quarterback. And from a kid, a true freshman, I don't see him making the same mistakes twice. That's the best compliment I think you can give a freshman in a tough spot, is that he makes the mistake, he learns from it, and he makes the change. And that's good coaching. That's a great player. It's amazing at what the future holds for him. But what I'm most excited for right now in this moment, he's maybe in the top 5 of quarterbacks in the conference right now. I don't know that you can name 5 Big Ten quarterbacks that I'd rather have this season than freshman Bryce Underwood. And that is on the high end of expectations that I had for this season. So not only is he going to be an amazing superstar if he continues on this trajectory, right now he's really, really good. And that changes what Michigan can be this season. So the expectations for me have shifted a little bit. I think that there's an outside chance that they do push to get into the top 4 or 3 spots in the Big Ten. They could make a push to get into the Big Ten championship game and even win the Big Ten title. So they got to clean some of these other things up. But what they're showing right now, they have an opportunity that they can't let slip away. And now you've got the bye week, and then Wisconsin comes in. By the way, Wisconsin just got stomped at home by Maryland. So that's not the same team that we thought in our preseason prediction coming in. That's a game that almost looks more like a get-right game coming out of the bye week. So it's time for Michigan to decide how they want the rest of this season to go here in this first bye week. And it's really exciting as a fan and talking to you about it here. But it also means these other bonehead mistakes have got to go. That's not championship level stuff. So, it's a double-edged sword for sure.
The other interesting thing for me versus regarding Bryce is that in the post game, he gave the same quote about, hey, we need to dot I's and cross T's. And on one hand, I went, well, okay, that's your line, right? But I really think he believes it. I think he's starting to see the game slow down. And, they always talk about when players can marry their talent with experience, there's a point where they just see the field differently. And I feel like we're seeing glimpses of that with him right now. And when that happens, okay, when he's able to consistently do that, I think we're going to see this offense elevated in a way that we haven't seen in a very, very long time. Even in the national championship year, it was complimentary football, a dominating defense, and a talented offense, right? But definitely the defense had the strength. I'm expecting by the end of this year, as good as our defense is, for the offense to eclipse it. And that's what I'm waiting to see. And I think as we head through this schedule, it's not a question of when, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And I'm sitting here with my popcorn and I can't wait.
Yeah. I'd wrap up saying a couple of things. Welcome back to the party, Rayshon Benny. Welcome back to the party, Trey Pierce. And keep an eye on the stat line going forward for Justice Haynes. He's off to a pretty remarkable start for running back, not only for Michigan, not only in Michigan history, but he probably should be getting mentioned in the early Heisman conversation here nationally. So keep your eyes peeled on that and do what you can to keep highlighting what Justice Haynes has done going forward, because right now he looks awfully special.
Totally agreed. All right. Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the UMGoBlue.com podcast. This is Phil Callahan along with
Clint Derringer.
Go Blue.
Go Blue.
Well, as you know, I was a head high school coach for a long time, and Michigan was always recruiting our players, and my son Henry played here, and when Jim Harbaugh came in, this is a hilarious story actually. In my house, we have a kind of a little church group Bible study on Wednesday night, and I leave my phone with my daughter, and I said, only interrupt me if it's one of the children. There's blood involved. And she comes down and she says, "There's a guy named Jim Harbaugh on the phone." I was like, "What?" So I, of course, thought it was a joke. I pick it up, walk outside, and he goes, "Hey, Biff, it's Jim Harbaugh." "Hey, Jim, how you doing?" He goes, and we just started talking about Michigan football. He said, "What do you think our record would have been last year had we punted the ball more?" I was like, "Jim, I don't know." And we just started talking ball, and he said, "Why don't you come up and join the staff?" And I said, "Well, I'm running this high school program in Baltimore." And he said, yeah, but why don't you come up and join the staff? And so I met him at the bowl game. That was the Citrus Bowl that year, right, where we beat the brakes off of Florida. And we met in his hotel room, and we were demonstrating offensive line blocking techniques on a dresser that was in his hotel room, and then it was kind of love ever after that. And then I was here. That was what, 16 days, 16. And then Baltimore had a little bit of an issue in the city with a young fella getting killed by the police, and city kind of blew up. And I said to Jim, I love it, but I got to go back. And so we started this program in the city, St. Francis Academy. And then we were going on there. I was very happy there. And then he called me at the end of 2020 and said, I'd really like you to come back. So I came back, and then it's kind of been, to me, Michigan, you know, I've been a lot of places. I've coached a lot of places. I've played. But Michigan to me is, honestly, it's just like home, man. You know, I feel like, you know, Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. You know, I just want to go home, and Michigan is like that for me. It's just so comfortable. The people here are wonderful, and then this situation. You know, I got fired at Charlotte, and Sharon gave me a call and was like, "Come up to the Northwestern game," and I said, "Okay." I came up, and then we spoke, and he asked me to come back and do this, and so I wanted to do it. And the other thing is, I've had a great relationship with you know, Ward, Manuel, and Doug, and so it feels right here.
Thank you for listening to the UMGoBlue.com podcast. All rights reserved.